Hi, I'd like to give you a brief overview of findings and trends in national reports in the areas of reading and literacy, including the National Reading Panel. So, first of all, I want you to know that the National Reading Panel was not the first time that we've ever looked into this topic. Going back to the 1960s with the first grade studies, as well as the work of Jean Chall, we did by we mean the field, engaged in a very deep examination of what the literature was finding. The consensus was that decoding and phonics instruction is when it's explicit and systematic, is preferable over a total lack of it when it comes to literacy gains, but there was not a consensus on one size fits all best approach of teaching phonics. And there was also consensus that you want to teach decoding and phonics in combination with also teaching meaning making and vocabulary. Marilyn Adams was very much a disciple, student of Jean Chall. Marilyn Adams also conducted deep studies on how children learn to read. Marilyn Adams brought a emphasis on phonemic awareness, as well as on decoding and systematic phonics instruction. But again, she wanted phonics instruction to be in context with also wide reading and writing and talking and discussion. Just a little bit before the National Reading Panel, you had a major study called Preventing Reading Difficulties in Young Children. This study came down on the side of systematic and explicit early phonics instruction, and it also came down on the side of phonemic awareness instruction as a prerequisite and co-requisite, meaning taught before as well as during early phonics instruction. But it also emphasized that this should be contextualized instead of isolated, meaning that you want to teach these skills as aspects of written language to promote the development of comprehension and meaning making. You want to combine, not isolate. Then you've got the National Reading Panel. I could easily make a 2 hour video on the National Reading Panel, and even that would not be enough. I'm making this a very short overview for you. The National Reading Panel had two overarching tasks that they were charged with by the federal government. Task A was to determine relationships between components of instruction and literacy gains among children, meaning K through 12. B was to, and they also looked into adult literacy too. Part B was to provide a basis for educators to make well-informed instructional decisions. Given that this was a cause-effect, causal relationship, or what leads to what type of thing, does A lead to B? They wound up using experimental and quasi-experimental design. What I mean by that is that they did a meta-analysis. They did a deep literature review on what the overall research findings are showing, but the type of research that they prioritized in terms of the research that they did their review on was quasi-experimental and experimental. An experimental design is when you've got randomized participants, you tightly control for variables, and you look for cause and effect. Similar to when in, let's say, medical research, you try to find out whether a drug is effective or not. You need to tightly control for variables and look for cause and effect. The difference between an experimental and quasi-experimental is just simply that in quasi-experimental design, you do not have randomization. And the fact that they looked primarily into this when they were doing their deep literature review, and they did not include qualitative studies like case studies, ethnographies, in their review of the literature, meant that you've got cause effect coming through in their findings, but there's the critics of the National Reading Panel would say that this is one reason why you've got a big five. Big five meaning phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary comprehension, but not a big six, motivation, because motivation gets into the social, the cultural, the interactions among people. And so the criticism of National Reading Panel is that not enough emphasis was placed on the social, the cultural, and the emotional aspects of reading. So some of the major findings, these aren't all, of the major findings in the National Reading Panel was that they came down to a strong focus on the Big Five, and that the Big Five are absolutely critical for reading. If any one of these areas of the Big Five are missing, then you're highly predictive to have a child with reading difficulties. The Big Five should be taught sequentially, meaning phonemic awareness, then phonics, then fluency, then vocabulary, then comprehension, but at the same time cumulatively, meaning that children benefit by making connections between phonemic awareness and, let's say, vocabulary and comprehension. And so, again, this is why the Big Five is why you've got such a strong emphasis on these skills in this class and others. The National Reading Panel came down on the side of teaching phonemic awareness very strongly in kindergarten and first grade, as well as systematic and explicit instruction in phonics early. What they did not say is what's the best one-size-fits-all approach to phonics. They also came down on the side of, in K through 12, comprehension strategies. We'll get more into that as we get further into this course, through very explicit instruction. Vocabulary should be taught through a range of vocabulary practices. Fluency should be taught through oral reading practices, choral reading, for instance, and reading out loud with pairs of students, reading out loud as a class. And you want to use a variety of comprehension strategies as appropriate for different forms of text, because the strategy that's appropriate for, let's say, imaginative fiction text might differ from the strategy that's appropriate from an informational text, like when you're reading a science book. And it would differ still between digital text and print text. Next, you've got and by the way, when we talk about what is aligned with the science of reading approaches, the science of reading approaches very much come down on the side of building on these findings. That's why it's so important to understand these findings in a nutshell when you're trying to figure out what is aligned with the science of reading or not when it comes to what the state wants from you. The advocates of science of reading approach would say that the findings of the National Reading Panel are what is science of reading aligned, as well as the next one here, National Literacy Panel on Language, Minority, Children, and Youth. This report was done at roughly the same, not that much after the National Reading Panel report was done, using the same methods as the National Reading Panel report, meaning a deep literature review called a meta-analysis, and they were primarily looking at experimental and quasi-experimental research designs as within their literature review, as opposed to including qualitative research designs. Some of their conclusions were that word reading and spelling skills for learning the second language can be equivalent to the word reading skills of first grade students, meaning that after some instruction, second language learners are capable of catching up in terms of word recognition and vocabulary. So small to moderate positive relationships were found between English oral language proficiency and word recognition skills in spelling skills and in English, meaning that there is a relationship, a positive relationship between a focus on teaching oral language skills to second language learners and their literacy gains. English oral language proficiency is closely associated with reading comprehension skills in English, even when students have adequate word recognition skills. What that means, bottom line, is that if you focus on helping children gain speech and help children gain reading comprehension in their second language, it will benefit them even if they may be struggling with vocabulary. Some effective instruction for English language learners includes emphasis on the Big Five, as well as emphasis on oral reading, as well as emphasis on skilled writing. And remember, reading and writing go together. You also want to have effective curriculum and instruction that includes strategic use of the child's first language to help them learn the second language. You want to use the first language to enhance instructional procedures. And you want to use very strategic direct instruction with tips and cues at just the right moment. That's called scaffolding. You want to make sure that you're doing very careful assessment of what's needed for the child. Adjustments need to be very specific for the differences in background knowledge that might be there. You need to have very explicit modeling and explanation, and use of pictures will help, and graphics and visuals will help second language learners. You want to have well-prepared teachers with professional development. We're a little bit lacking probably in much of our university instruction. That's where professional when it comes to English language learners. Let's face it, there is one course, for instance, at UALR that we offer for second language learners, but I don't know if you've taken it. And that's why really strong professional development over the years is also needed. You want to be respectful of the home language. Remember, I've talked before in other videos about the importance of additive approaches to instruction instead of subtractive. The National Literacy Panel on Language Minority Children and Youth came down very strongly in favor of bilingual approaches to instruction as opposed to approaches to instruction where you take away the child's first language, and very strongly in favor of using the home language as a tool to teach English. And again, the findings of the National Early Literacy Panel were very consistent with the National Reading Panel, and it reinforced the practices that were encouraged by the National Reading Panel. So that just gives you an overview of what the major findings are in major research that we've done in the field. Take care.